Dirty H here guys, and welcome to the Kepler project. Before I start building anything, let's address the elephant in the room. You may be wondering why Kepler? Why not Earth? Why go to outer space? And there's two or so main reasons why. So if you guys were unlucky enough to see my very B-screen trailer, you'll know that I've tried to create a backstory on how we got here to Kepler in the future. And I chose Kepler because it's very similar to Earth, and if we had the means as a species to travel to a place like Kepler that is like millions of kilometers away, we absolutely would. It would make sense economically as well, because it's much less cost involved in setting up once we get there. So what would make building on a Kepler type world any different from Earth? Maybe they have materials on the planet that offer different attributes, maybe some of them are electrically charged, or maybe they give off like some sort of hydromagnetic charge. And this could potentially drastically change the way that cities are built. They may include transportation that doesn't make any sense here on Earth, and maybe the need for personal transportation, i.e. cars, is massively decreased, and there may not be any need for roads. This entire operation was financed and controlled by a group called the Omega Group. They were very quick to set up base once they had touched down on Kepler, and the first thing they did was set up hydroponic gardens and a massive steel mine so that they could start creating a city large enough for the evacuation of Earth. Now, as lovely as that sounds, the Omega Group was known as a very cutthroat organization back on Earth, and their intentions with this city are to set it out so that they can have full control over the population. At first glance it may look like an engineering marvel, and as much as that may be true, a deeper look is going to reveal the more sinister plans that the Omega Group have in mind. The entire design of the city is based around controlling the population that live here. From the job you work, to the way that you get to work, down to the clothes that you wear, every thought and feeling is instigated by the Omega Group. The bottom line will be, every citizen living here is giving up their basic rights for comfort, and the comfort will only be supplied by one organization, and take a guess who that is. I've always liked the idea of future cities using cutting edge technology, and getting to build this type of city in City Skylines means that I can really immerse myself in the city with public transport and citizens walking from here and there and everything working like a real city. And as you would imagine, I've used a pretty extensive list of mods to be able to do this. But the Steam workshop is literally littered with the types of things that we need to build this city, so we are not short of anything. So as it stands right now, my plan is to have the entire city or most of the city based inside this huge structure. This is going to make the surveillance on the population a lot easier, and it just looks really cool, I think. I found an asset on the workshop called the Death Star, turned it to procedural objects and blew that up, and I've used that for most of the structure, and it looks really cool too. It looks really sci-fi, the colour and the textures on it and stuff. And what I've tried to do is create these flat areas within the structure and try and have sort of different levels to it, and eventually we're going to have all our roads and stuff, and most of the building is going to be on these flat areas. For now I've just got one train line coming in that I may turn into a hyperloop, and also there's just one road coming in, and it's all in a tunnel obviously, so we can't see it. So we're about ready now to start putting some services in, and I'm going to start here with some power plants. So maybe these are geothermal power plants or something of the like, and I'm trying to install them here so that they're away from the main structure, but also I want to have it so that when we look from directly above, it kind of looks like looking on a motherboard or a microchip. It looks very organized and deliberate. Next, we need some water, and conveniently the city is going to be right next to this lake here. So I'm trying to create a bit of a structure here where we can run some pipes, so it looks like we're just drawing the water up through the pipes and into the main structure where it is purified then distributed. There isn't too much detail out here, just a little wee bit on the top, just a door and some maintenance stuff where some workers can access. But in terms of this water facility and also the power plants, I'm definitely going to revisit this in future episodes and add a little bit more detail, and things like solar farms, for instance, will definitely be added to the city. With this first area here, I want to make kind of an industrial area where we can create some jobs for the people that are going to live here. And I really want to make sure that every part of this city works and runs like a normal city Skylines city. I think it would be pretty pointless to make all of this potentially cool stuff and just have none of it usable or functional. So I want real jobs, so maybe this area here is an industrial area where they carry out maintenance on the city, and eventually we'll build some offices and stuff like that to sort that demand. But for now, these industrial buildings are perfect for the new citizens to come and work in. So obviously I've had to run a road here so that we can connect these buildings and have them function properly in game. But what I do here also is cover over that road very cunningly with some retaining walls and surface networks to create this sort of raised false floor. And I guess this is just demonstrating some of the methods I'm going to use throughout this series to hide those roads, because we don't want them. I don't want them visible, but we need them to have the game function correctly. So in order to make sure people aren't walking down those roads where we can't see, I've put pedestrian paths around the place too. This ensures that we see the people walking around above our false floor and not down on the road. Now I can start putting some cube services in and get some residents moving into the city. And what I'm going to try and do here is put a few down on the roadside, and also I'm going to try and put some up on some pedestrian paths, because I want to create a lot of height changes and variations within the city. And if I use these pedestrian paths very grossly at the moment and put the cube surfaces in the correct place, then I can see without doing anything else whether it's going to work this way or not. So essentially the cube surfaces are placed up on the pedestrian paths with the spawn point set back to the road, and this will hopefully draw citizens up those paths to those higher levels. There's going to be a lot of roads to try and hide in this particular part, so what I'm doing is pulling all the paths to the front of this buildable area, and this is going to be a really highly visual area, and the back part might be large buildings that are hiding the road. But all of our main services, especially the ones that are going to generate a lot of movement with the citizens, are all going to be placed at the front here. For instance, I've got a university and a high school up on the highest level. I think the next level down I put a lot of low commercial, and then on the ground I also put just a mix of pretty much everything. So that leaves us the back part of this buildable area where the roads are to place down heaps of cube services in future, because I'd really like the population to be up around 50,000. I want a heap of people living in this, but we'll see how we go on that front. I think I've made my PC very nervous with that statement. So the cube services are working. You can see heaps of people walking around already, And the next thing I'm going to do is start placing in the public transport. Now this is going to be a massive part of this series. With no roads in the city or no visible roads, there's obviously going to be a heavy reliance on some form of public transport, if not 3 or 4 different types, to be honest. But let's just start with one here, and I went onto the workshop and I wanted to try and find something non-evasive and obviously something that it would go with our futuristic theme here. And I've chose these little pods. They're from the London Heathrow Airport, but they're perfect for this. They look really futuristic, they're very non-evasive. It's a small narrow track and just a little wee 4 or 5 person pod that you jump into that I'm going to tweak a little bit with Vehicle Manager so we can get more people in them. But I thought these were perfect for the city, so I'm going to put in a depot here and the first stop. And I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit putting this in. There's no demand for this whatsoever at the moment, but the whole city is going to be built around this type of public transport, so it's important for me to get it in and at least run a small part of the track now so that I can build around it. So now I'm going to create these raised pathways and I'm going to start placing down some buildings so that it looks like these pathways are sort of attached to the front of the buildings. Most of these buildings have been manipulated with procedural objects so that I can scale them down or up to fit in really neatly. And for now I'm just focusing on getting the basic buildings in, and we're going to come back and detail them up really hardcore a bit more later on. So the number one theme I was looking for with these buildings was I want a really industrial sci-fi looking, almost steampunk looking, and these certainly won't be right throughout the city. I'm going to have different types of architecture here and there, but for this particular area that's what I'm going for. And these awesome buildings by Quad Riders are just fantastic. These buildings have the exact look we're going for and really help transition from that industrial area we built earlier over to this more hyper commercial area that we're going to build. And as we move further along here, you see me put these round glass thingies around the pod track here, but eventually I end up taking these out. I thought they looked really cool, and maybe they do, but they really don't serve any purpose, so yeah, I end up taking them out. So you'll also see a few more buildings get put down in the background here, and some of them are just sort of glass frontage type skyscrapers that have been manipulated with PO. And also you'll see me move the cube services that I have on the path to more appropriate places. So this part here is going to be our hyper commercial area that I mentioned earlier. It's not going to be massive, but it's going to be very, very busy. I want a stop down here for the pod track, and I really want this to be portrayed as the social area of the city, or maybe one of the social areas of the city. So right now you'll see me use the ground station for the pod track, but eventually I upgrade this to the elevated one. It just looks and runs a lot better. I also raise up the path that runs through on ground level here, just because I think it looks quite cool and a bit different. And then the last significant thing to go in before more detailing is just some nice gardens. So that's all of the most important stuff in now, and I can really just work with it and put more buildings in close up to these paths so that it looks like there's access off these paths into these buildings. Eventually I come back and put much more detail in where these paths meet these buildings and make it look like little shop fronts and things like that. Also, you may notice I've got a bit of a flood going on. I'm trying to create a water feature here, or a bit of a water park, but eventually I take this out anyway. I leave the design in but just remove the water, because by the time I'd finished detailing everything it just took up so much room. So now I move on to adding a little bit of animation to the area, and if we go up about 100 feet from where we were working, I'm going to try and create these sort of voids or doors on the sides of these buildings, and I'm going to use procedural objects and the modules mod to try and animate a little craft or something going in one door and out the other. I really want lots and lots of animation and heaps of things going on, and vehicles going through the air this way and that way, and people on different levels walking around everywhere. And this is a little bit of a trial, I guess, as well, just to see how it looks, if it's gonna, look right. I am still toying with the idea of flying cars or something like that, but for now I just stick with a good old-fashioned sort of futuristic looking airplane. And I had to mess around with the timing because I wanted a door that opened as well, just to make things more complicated. So it's going to look like a door drops down and the vehicle shoots out of a void. And I'm not 100% sold on it, but the animation it's added to the area is pretty cool. In amongst all the various detailing we're going to do, I want to make sure to have plenty of pipes and vents and that sort of industrious stuff around as well. I don't think it really has to have any particular need or serve any real purpose, but it's definitely more of just a visual thing, sort of like you can see the inner workings of the city. Maybe later on in the series I can include a couple of like open sewers that have become sort of horrible dumping grounds and stuff like that. But for now we could imagine these pipes are maybe air conditioning and water and sewerage, which is three pretty vital things. So I'm just using a bunch of random props here and making really sort of, sci-fi industrious looking things and placing them all over the place really. If you guys are interested, I've got a link to the collection in the description of the video, but I do suggest that you don't subscribe to all of them. Go through and pick out the ones that you need from the collection. All of these props will be included in that collection. So rather than build my own elevated walkways and make these paths invisible, I've decided to keep them as just the vanilla raised path and put props over them. I found a cool looking skywalk that has a blue neon on it, and I used some other sci-fi props to cover the ground, or rather the base texture on the elevated walkway. And now I can start putting the shop frontages in. These are all just purely cosmetic. However, I do line them up with existing pathways where they V off on a 90 degree, so that it sort of just naturally looks like the citizens are walking into a shop. I also hide a few cube surfaces up here like you see me do right at the start of the episode. Then I can finally move on to swapping the pod station over from the ground one to the elevated one. This is mainly because it runs a little bit smoother, but mainly because I need to bring in the tracks elevated here. And I've decided to use a bit of glass and some props and make this into a bit of a custom station. I'm going to try and make some large waiting areas on each end of it, and then I want to make this pretty cool looking glass facade that follows the original shape of the tracks. So I had this cool idea to put some upside down buildings in here. They just look really good in my head for some reason, and we've got the opportunity to do it here with the way that I've built this. We've got a structure above where we're building as well that's perfect to hang these buildings down from. And potentially it could make sense to build like this because it's using a lot of otherwise wasted space. And that is it for episode 1. My intention with the first episode was just to get you guys up to speed on what this series is going to be all about. So I hope that I've achieved that, and I hope to see you guys on episode 2. Take it easy, and I will see you later on.